The Battle of Stalingrad, fought from August 23, 1942, to February 2, 1943, was one of the largest, bloodiest, and most significant confrontations in history. Its outcome not only altered the course of World War II, but also changed the political landscape of Europe and the world. In this video, we will examine the background, strategies, key figures, and impact of the battle, as well as the human suffering that defined the event. From the strategic importance of Stalingrad to the heroism of soldiers and civilians, this was a battle of monumental proportions that shifted the tide of the war in favor of the Allies. By the summer of 1942, Nazi Germany had conquered much of Europe and was deep into its campaign against the Soviet Union. Following the initial success of Operation Barbarossa in 1941, German forces had advanced rapidly, reaching the outskirts of Moscow by the winter of 1941. However, they were stopped by the brutal Soviet winter and the unyielding resistance of the Red Army. By mid-1942, the Germans regrouped and refocused their efforts on the southern front, targeting the oil-rich Caucasus region and Stalingrad, a city on the Volga River. The Nazis, led by Adolf Hitler, saw Stalingrad as a critical objective, not only for its strategic position, but also for its symbolic value. The city's capture would deal a blow to Soviet morale and help open the path to the oil fields, which were vital for Germany's war effort. Stalin, on the other hand, understood the symbolic importance of Stalingrad and declared that the city's defense was a matter of survival for the Soviet Union. The battle that followed would be a contest of wills, military might, and ideological perseverance. The German offensive against Stalingrad began in the summer of 1942 as part of Operation Blue, which aimed to seize control of the southern Soviet territories, including the oil-rich Caucasus. The attack on Stalingrad was initially seen as a secondary objective within the larger operation, but as the Wehrmacht advanced towards the city, Hitler became obsessed with capturing it, partly due to its symbolic connection with Stalin. General Friedrich Paulus commanded the German Sixth Army, which, along with the Fourth Panzer Army, was tasked with seizing Stalingrad. The Germans initially enjoyed success, advancing quickly toward the city. On August 23, 1942, German bombers began their relentless airstrikes on Stalingrad, reducing much of the city to rubble. The Luftwaffe's bombings devastated the civilian population and destroyed key industrial centers, but the Soviets were determined to hold their ground. The German forces underestimated the resilience of the Soviet defenders, who fought tenaciously from house to house, street to street, and even room to room. The civilian population of Stalingrad played an essential role in the defense of the city. The Soviet government had ordered that all civilians remain in the city to assist in the defense efforts, and many of them took up arms, worked in factories to produce weapons and ammunition, or carried out tasks to aid the Soviet soldiers. Women, children, and the elderly were involved in every aspect of the battle, from digging trenches to providing medical aid to the wounded. As the battle progressed, the civilians endured unimaginable hardship. The constant bombardment by German artillery and airstrikes destroyed much of the city, leaving the civilians with little shelter. Starvation and disease took a heavy toll, and many civilians perished in the battle. However, their determination to hold the city was crucial to the eventual Soviet victory. The courage of the civilians, combined with the resilience of the Red Army, helped ensure that Stalingrad would never fall. By November 1942, the situation for the German forces had become increasingly dire. The Germans had advanced deep into the city, but were unable to secure a decisive victory. The Red Army had held on longer than anyone had anticipated, and the German supply lines were stretched thin. In response to the worsening situation, the Soviet High Command, led by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, decided to launch a counteroffensive. Operation Uranus, which began on November 19, 1942, was a daring plan to encircle and trap the German Sixth Army in Stalingrad. The Soviets identified the weakest points in the German lines, particularly the Romanian and Italian forces defending the flanks of the Sixth Army. The Soviet forces, supported by tanks and artillery, launched a series of surprise attacks, breaking through the German defenses and rapidly advancing. Within days, the Soviet forces had surrounded the German Sixth Army, trapping over 250,000 soldiers inside the city. As the German forces inside the encirclement realized the dire situation they were in, they attempted to break out, but the Soviet forces held firm. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe attempted to resupply the trapped forces by air, but Soviet air superiority and the harsh winter conditions made these efforts largely ineffective. The situation for the German Sixth Army continued to worsen. Starvation, disease, and frostbite became rampant, as supplies of food, water, and ammunition dwindled. The harsh Russian winter, with temperatures reaching as low as 40 degrees Celsius, further compounded the suffering of the trapped German soldiers. Many soldiers succumbed to the elements, while others were killed in the constant artillery bombardment. General Paulus, under immense pressure from Hitler to hold the city at all costs, found himself in an untenable position. Despite the worsening conditions, Hitler insisted that Paulus continue to fight. The German soldiers, many of whom were wounded or too weak to continue, began to lose hope. However, Hitler's orders remained unyielding, and the Sixth Army was forced to continue fighting in the face of certain defeat. By early February 1943, the situation had become untenable for the Germans. With their forces decimated and no hope of rescue, General Paulus finally capitulated on February 2, 1943. The surrender of the German Sixth Army marked the end of the Battle of Stalingrad. Over 91,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner, though many would perish in Soviet captivity. The victory at Stalingrad was a decisive turning point in World War II. The Germans had suffered a humiliating defeat, losing one of their most experienced and well-equipped armies. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, had achieved a resounding victory that boosted morale and proved to the world that the Nazis could be defeated. It also marked the beginning of a series of Soviet offensives that would eventually push the Germans back to Berlin. The Battle of Stalingrad had a profound and lasting impact on both the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. For the Soviets, the victory was a symbol of resilience and a turning point in the war. The Germans, meanwhile, were forced into a long retreat that would eventually lead to their defeat. The psychological impact of the battle on both sides cannot be overstated. For the Soviets, Stalingrad became a symbol of defiance and national pride, while for the Germans, it represented the beginning of the end. The battle also had a lasting effect on military strategy. The German defeat at Stalingrad showed the limitations of Hitler's leadership and military strategy. The Soviets, led by brilliant commanders like Zhukov, demonstrated the importance of effective planning, resource management, and the ability to adapt to changing conditions. The Battle of Stalingrad remains one of the most significant and pivotal moments in World War II. The ferocity of the battle, the suffering of the soldiers and civilians, and the eventual Soviet victory altered the course of history. It not only marked the turning point in the war, but also demonstrated the incredible human capacity for resilience and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. The lessons learned from Stalingrad continue to resonate in military strategy and history to this day.